Captain Daniel Hayes had always thought he knew danger. He had faced storms in space, pirate attacks in distant systems, and hostile alien creatures on uncharted planets, but nothing in his training could have prepared him for what awaited him on Valara. He was not going there to fight. He was going there to protect. The mission was clear: escort and guard the twin princesses of Valara, Leora and Selene. They were heirs to the throne of a planet known for its beauty, wealth, and secrets. Their world gleamed like a jewel in the starry sky, oceans shimmering in deep sapphire, forests glowing in emerald light, and cities that floated in the clouds. But even paradise had shadows, and the twins were under constant threat. Daniel's shuttle entered Valara's orbit, and he could see the palace from above. Its spires reached like silver needles into the sky, and its walls reflected the sunlight like polished gemstones. He felt a strange mix of awe and responsibility. This was no ordinary assignment. Failure was not an option. Not for him, not for the princesses. When he first met them, he understood immediately why some people doubted the need for a human bodyguard. Leora and Selene were beautiful beyond words. Leora had hair like molten gold, eyes like silver lakes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. Selene's hair was a shade darker, almost like night itself, and her gaze was calm yet piercing. They moved gracefully with poise and elegance, as if the world itself bent to their presence. "Do we really need a human?" Selene asked, her voice soft but carrying a sharp edge. There was a hint of skepticism in her tone, a challenge Daniel had to meet. "Trust me," Daniel said, straightening his back. "I've faced worse than what the stars can throw at us." His voice was steady, but he felt a flutter of unease. Humans were not native to Valara. They were outsiders, fragile in comparison to these advanced beings. Yet he knew that what humans lacked in natural power they made up with heart, courage, and cunning. The twins studied him carefully. Leora's eyes lingered on his face, searching, trying to measure if he was truly capable. "We've had guards before," she said, "but none like you." There was no insult in her words, just observation. Daniel felt a strange warmth in that moment, a connection forming despite the gulf between their worlds. That night, Daniel was given quarters near the twins' chamber. He could hear the soft hum of their palace, the gentle whispers of servants, and the quiet tension in the air. Lying on his bed, he thought about the responsibility ahead. Protecting royalty was different from any mission he had faced. These weren't just lives. They were symbols, hopes, and dreams for an entire planet, and he was now the shield standing between them and any danger that dared approach. The next morning, he accompanied the twins through the palace gardens. Leora spoke of politics, of alliances, and of the weight of leadership. Selene walked quietly beside him, occasionally pointing out constellations in the alien sky. Daniel listened, trying to absorb not just their words but their hearts, their fears, their dreams. There was fragility in them, yes, but also a strength that took his breath away. And in that moment, Daniel realized that this mission was more than just protection. It was about trust, understanding, and connection. The twins needed someone who could be both sword and companion, shield and friend. And he had no choice but to rise to the challenge. Because in the vastness of the galaxy, among stars that burned like ancient fires, Captain Daniel Hayes was about to discover that being human meant more than survival. It meant courage, compassion, and a heart willing to fight for those who mattered most. And the twins, Leora and Selene, were about to change his life forever. The first week passed quietly. Daniel settled into his role, patrolling the palace halls and shadowing the twins. He had expected resistance, perhaps coldness from the royal sisters, but instead, he saw caution and curiosity in their eyes. They watched him closely, learning his habits, testing his reactions, and he, in turn, studied them, not just as charges to protect, but as people. Leora was precise and sharp. Every word, every movement calculated, as if she weighed the future in each decision. Selene was different, soft, thoughtful, and quiet, with a depth in her gaze that made Daniel feel he could get lost in her world. Together they were like fire and water, balanced yet unpredictable. Protecting them would not just require skill, it would require heart. Then it happened. A quiet alarm, a subtle vibration beneath his boots, alerted him first. Someone had breached the palace gates. Daniel's instincts flared. He signaled for the twins to stay inside and moved swiftly through the corridor, weapon in hand. The intruders were fast, silent, and deadly, shadow-like figures that moved with precision. But Daniel had trained for chaos, for moments when hesitation meant death. He intercepted the first attacker with a single motion, disarming him before he could raise his weapon. Another came from behind, and Daniel twisted, using the intruder's momentum to throw him into a wall. The palace, usually serene and quiet, erupted into a storm of action. Through it all, Daniel noticed the twins watching from the doorway, their silver and night-black eyes wide with fear and admiration. They had seen guards before, trained soldiers of their own species, but none moved with such determination, such unwavering focus. He was not just fighting for duty. He was fighting for them, for their lives, for the trust they had just begun to place in him. After a tense few minutes that felt like hours, the intruders lay incapacitated. Daniel's chest heaved as he secured the area. The twins stepped forward cautiously, as if emerging from a dream. You saved us," Leora whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out and touched his arm, her fingers warm and real. "I didn't think anyone could protect us like that." Celine's hand found his shoulder steady and soft. "You didn't just fight for us," she said. "You cared." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. They weren't just acknowledging his skill, they were acknowledging his heart. He had fought not out of obligation, but because he refused to see them harmed. And in that moment he realized that protection was more than weapons and strategy. It was presence. It was courage paired with care. The evening that followed was quiet, but the weight of what had happened lingered. Daniel shared a meal with the twins in the palace garden, and for the first time they spoke more openly. Leora discussed strategies to secure their planet, while Celine talked about their dreams for a peaceful future. Daniel listened, offering insights, encouragement, and sometimes just silent support. By nightfall, the palace lights reflected in the lakes like scattered stars. Daniel sat beside the twins, watching them as they watched the horizon. He understood something then that he hadn't before. These weren't just charges to guard, they were souls to cherish. They were not only royalty, they were vulnerable, human in their emotions, and in need of someone who would not falter. As he lay in his quarters later, Daniel thought about the first attack. It had been chaos, fear, and adrenaline. But through it all he had felt alive in a way he never had before. He had protected, yes, but he had also connected, and the connection was intoxicating, binding him to the twins in a way that duty alone could never explain. Outside, the stars of Valara shone bright, cold, and distant. Inside, Daniel Hayes felt a fire he could not extinguish. The galaxy was dangerous, but he would face every threat if it meant keeping Leora and Celine safe, and somehow he knew this was only the beginning. After the first attack, life in the palace did not return to complete normalcy. Daniel remained vigilant, walking the corridors at night, scanning the skies, listening to the faintest sounds of movement. But in the daytime, the palace became a place of fragile peace. It was during these hours that Daniel began to see the twins as more than royalty. He began to see them as people, with hopes, fears, and desires. Leora was fierce and intelligent. She questioned everything, from palace security to planetary policies. She spoke with conviction, commanding attention without needing to raise her voice. Daniel admired her mind, the way she thought 3 steps ahead, the careful way she considered consequences. Yet he also noticed her small gestures, the way she frowned when something was unfair, the way her hand shook ever so slightly when she admitted she was scared. She was strong, yes, but she was also human in ways that mirrored his own vulnerabilities. Selene was different. She was soft-spoken, quiet, and observant. She would sit by the balcony, gazing at the stars, her expression thoughtful, almost melancholic. Daniel often joined her, listening as she spoke of her dreams, of peace between worlds, of knowledge shared rather than taken, of beauty preserved. Her words were calm, but they carried a depth that made him feel small and awed at the same time. He found himself waiting for those moments, wanting to hear her voice, to see the world through her eyes. One afternoon, as the sun painted the gardens in golden light, Leora and Selene asked Daniel to join them for practice. They were learning self-defense techniques, though more as tradition than necessity. Daniel instructed them patiently, correcting stances, showing moves, and sometimes letting them win. Laughter filled the air when Selene clumsily tripped over her own foot, and even Leora smiled, a rare, genuine expression. During a pause, Selene turned to him, her hand brushing against his arm. "You always know what to do," she said softly, her eyes shining. "It's like you. See things before they happen." Daniel felt a warmth spread through his chest. "It's my job," he replied, but the truth was more. It wasn't just his training that made him alert. It was his care for them, his desire to protect them. And in that moment he realized that the line between duty and affection was blurring. That evening, after training, the twins invited Daniel to sit with them in the palace gardens. Leora leaned back on the marble bench, exhausted but smiling, while Celine rested her head lightly on his shoulder. It was a small gesture, almost accidental, yet it made Daniel's heart race. There was trust in that touch, comfort in their closeness, and a silent promise that they were letting him in, not just as a bodyguard, but as someone who mattered. Over the next few days, Daniel noticed little things. Celine would save him a cup of tea in the mornings. Leora would ask for his opinion before meetings, valuing his thoughts as more than just human perspective. They laughed together, debated together, and sometimes simply sat in silence, their presence enough to calm his restless mind. One night, as he looked at them sleeping under the soft glow of the palace lights, Daniel understood something profound. He was no longer just a protector. He was a part of their lives, woven into the quiet moments and the danger-filled hours alike. Their safety depended on him, but so did their happiness. And for the first time, Daniel didn't feel the weight of duty alone. He felt connection, trust, and something deeper stirring within his heart, a bond that went beyond allegiance, beyond responsibility, something that made every risk, every sleepless night, every battle worthwhile. He didn't yet know how the future would unfold, but one thing was certain: he was no longer just a human among aliens. He was their friend, their companion, and perhaps, in ways he could not yet name, the person they had chosen to belong to. And in that quiet moment, watching the stars with them, Daniel realized that being human was not just about survival or courage. It was about the capacity to love, to connect, and to risk everything for someone who had already risked so much for him. The calm of Valara did not last. Rumors of a coup rippled through the palace like a cold wind, and Daniel could sense the tension building. Guards whispered, shadows moved differently, and the twins were quieter than usual. He had trained for battles, for alien wars and merciless attacks, but this was different. This threat was personal. It was close, silent, and potentially deadly. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the palace, Daniel found Leora and Selena waiting for him in the garden. Their faces were pale, their eyes shining with worry. Leora spoke first, her voice firm but trembling. "Daniel, we cannot hide it from you anymore. There are forces within the palace that want us gone. We are not safe, even with all our guards." Daniel felt a cold knot in his stomach. He had anticipated danger, but hearing it from them made it real, immediate. "I will protect you," he said, his voice steady. "No matter what, I will not let anyone harm you." Celine reached out and took his hand, the touch delicate yet urgent. "We know you are not like the others," she said softly. "You don't see us as symbols. You see us as ourselves, and we need more than protection. We need you with us, by our side fully, not just as a guard." Daniel's chest tightened. He had trained to respond to orders, to fight without hesitation, to remain detached. But these words, they stirred something deeper inside him. He looked at them, the two sisters who had become his world in a few short weeks. He saw fear, vulnerability, and an unspoken plea for trust. "Leora." "Celine," he began, struggling to find words. "I've always thought my job was to protect, to stay strong. But when I'm with you, I realize it's more than that. You're not just under my protection. You are important to me, more than anyone or anything I've ever known." Tears shimmered in Celine's eyes. Leora's fingers trembled as they rested against his arm. "Then don't just protect us with your strength," Leora said, her voice breaking slightly. "Let us in. Let us trust you completely. Be with us. Not because you have to, but because you choose to." Daniel swallowed hard. The night air felt heavy, charged with emotion. He could hear the whisper of leaves, the distant hum of palace lights, the quiet beating of his own heart. Everything seemed to slow, yet the weight of the decision pressed down on him. To protect them was one thing. To let himself belong to them was another. He stepped closer, holding both their hands now. I will stay with you," he said finally. "Not just as a bodyguard, not just as someone who fights. I will stay because I want to. Because I care. Because you matter to me, more than I ever thought possible. A quiet relief washed over them. Celine pressed her forehead to his chest. Leora rested her hand on his shoulder. The vulnerability in their eyes mirrored the vulnerability in his own heart. For the first time, there was no pretense, no walls, no distance. Just trust. Just connection. That night, Daniel lay awake in his quarters thinking about what had just passed. The palace was dangerous, the threats real, but something had shifted. They had not only allowed him into their lives, they had given him a place in their hearts. And in that gift, he found a strength he had never known. He knew the coming days would test them all. The coup, the betrayal, and the shadowed enemies were still out there. But Daniel also knew something else. He was no longer just a human assigned to guard alien royalty. He was part of their lives, entwined with their trust, their fears, and perhaps something even deeper, love. And with that realization, Daniel Hayes understood the truth of his own heart. Protecting them was no longer a duty. It was a choice he would make every moment, every breath, and every heartbeat for as long as he lived. The days that followed were quieter, yet charged with a new intensity. The threat of the coup still loomed, but the palace had a rhythm now, one that Daniel moved through with the twins. He was no longer just a guard watching from the shadows. He was part of their daily lives, a presence they relied on in every moment, big or small. Leora began seeking his counsel more often, discussing politics, security, and alliances. Daniel listened carefully, offering perspectives she hadn't considered. Her sharp mind impressed him endlessly, and he found himself challenged in ways he hadn't expected. Celine, on the other hand, shared her quiet world with him, dreams of stars, of distant planets, of a future without fear. Daniel found himself drawn to her calm, patient presence, the way she looked at him as if she already knew him, as if she had been waiting for someone like him all her life. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the palace windows, the twins invited him to sit with them in their private chamber. The storm outside mirrored the tension in the city, but inside there was warmth, closeness, and trust. Leora leaned against his shoulder, exhausted but smiling, while Celine's fingers intertwined with his. It was not a moment of passion, not yet. It was something more intimate, more profound. They were letting him into their world, allowing him to be more than a protector. They were sharing their fears, their hopes, and their hearts. And Daniel, for the first time, allowed himself to feel fully. "You've changed things for us," Leora whispered, her voice soft. "Before you, we were always alone, always cautious. But with you, I feel safe." Celine's eyes glistened as she added, "Safe and understood. Like we can finally be ourselves without pretending. That means everything." Daniel's chest tightened. He had trained his entire life to protect, to fight, to survive. But this was different. To hold their trust, to be part of their lives, to be needed in ways that were emotional and tender. It was a responsibility heavier than any weapon, yet infinitely more rewarding. Over the next few days, the bond grew stronger. Daniel shared meals with them, walked in the palace gardens, and spent long nights discussing stars, politics, and personal dreams. Leora laughed more often, teasing him gently while Celine confided in him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. Daniel realized that these quiet moments, the small gestures of trust and affection, were as vital as any battle he had ever fought. One night, after a long day of council meetings, Leora and Celine invited him to stay in the chamber, closer than usual. There was no rush, no pressure, only the gentle acceptance of his presence. Leora rested her head lightly on his chest while Celine held his hand, and Daniel felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of belonging, of home. He understood then that being their bodyguard was no longer just about defending them from harm. It was about being their anchor in a world that demanded perfection, about being someone they could trust, someone they could lean on. They had allowed him into their hearts, and in return he gave them his. Outside the storm raged, but inside there was peace, love, and connection. The galaxy was dangerous and enemies still lurked, but Daniel Hayes felt a certainty he had never known. He was not just a human in a palace of alien royalty. He was part of a family, chosen and cherished, and nothing, not weapons, not battles, not fear, could take that away. As he lay there, flanked by the twins he had vowed to protect, Daniel understood the truth. Courage was not only in facing the enemy. True courage was in opening your heart, in allowing yourself to care, to trust, and to be vulnerable. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Hayes felt that he had found his purpose, his place, and the meaning of being human. The bond was no longer about duty. It was about love, trust, and a connection that would carry them through any storm. The palace had never felt so tense. Rumors of betrayal had grown into reality. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Whispers of plotting filled the corridors, and Daniel could sense danger closing in from all sides. For the first time, he felt the weight of his promise press heavier than ever. He would protect Leora and Celine no matter the cost. That night, the warning came. Sirens blared, red lights casting harsh shadows across the polished halls. Daniel moved instinctively, signaling the twins to stay close. Their hands found his, a lifeline in the storm, and he felt the trust they had placed in him burning like fire in his chest. The attackers were swift and organized. They stormed the palace gates, bypassing outer defenses, and chaos erupted. Daniel fought with precision, but every strike, every move, every decision had to account for the twins' safety. He could not afford a single mistake. Leora and Celine were not just charges. They were part of him now, and their lives mattered more than his own. Leora joined the defense, her sharp mind guiding the palace guards, giving commands with authority and clarity. Celine, though smaller and quieter, moved with surprising strength and courage, helping others to safety, lending calm and focus when panic threatened to take over. Daniel realized then that their power was not just in their titles, but in their hearts. Together they were formidable. In the chaos, Daniel found himself face to face with a masked intruder. The fight was brutal, each movement demanding everything he had. Pain burned in his muscles, blood trickled, but his mind was clear. One thought drove him: keep them safe. He could hear Leora's sharp orders, Celine's calming voice, their faith in him, and it fueled his strength beyond anything he had known. After what felt like hours, the attackers were repelled. The palace was battered but standing. Daniel's armor was dented, his body bruised, yet he felt an elation he could not explain. He had kept them safe. He had honored his promise. When he returned to the twins, they rushed into his arms. Leora's head rested on his chest, her body trembling with relief. Celine clung to his hand, tears running silently down her face. You saved us," Celine whispered, her voice breaking. We couldn't have done it without you." Daniel held them close, feeling their warmth, their trust, and the depth of his own emotions. "You were never alone," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "I'm here, and I'll always be here. Nothing will take that away." For the first time, the palace felt like a home rather than a fortress. They were safe, together, and their bond had been forged stronger than ever. Daniel realized that bravery was not just in fighting enemies. It was in standing firm for the people you cared about, in risking everything without hesitation, and in embracing the trust and love given to you. That night, the three of them sat together in the quiet of the palace garden. Stars glimmered overhead, and the soft sounds of the city settling for the night surrounded them. Daniel looked at Leora and Celine, their faces illuminated by moonlight, and he understood fully. He did not just protect them. He belonged to them as they belonged to him, and in that silent, powerful moment he felt the truth of humanity shine. Strength was not just muscle or weapon. It was heart, courage, and the ability to care fiercely. Daniel Hayes, a human among aliens, had proven that, not with technology or titles, but with love, loyalty, and an unbreakable spirit. As he held the twins close, he knew that whatever storms came next, political, personal, or cosmic, they would face them together. The bond was unshakable. The promise was real. And Daniel had found not only his purpose, but the family he had never known he needed. The morning after the battle, the palace felt different. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, warming the marble halls, and the city outside was alive again. The coup had been stopped, the attackers captured, and the immediate danger gone. But for Daniel Hayes, the real victory was something quieter, something deeper. He walked through the palace gardens, and there they were, Leora and Selene. They smiled when they saw him, but it was a smile that spoke of relief, trust, and something more. Leora's golden hair shimmered in the sunlight. Selene's dark locks glowed like the night sky. They were alive, whole, and free. And Daniel realized he had done more than protect them. He had become part of their lives, and they had become part of his. "You saved more than just the palace," Leora said softly, her hand brushing against his. "You saved us, in a way no one else could." Selene took his other hand, her eyes shining. "You gave us trust, hope, and courage. And now we want you with us, not just as a guard, but as someone we can rely on always." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had trained for battle, for survival, for protecting lives in the harshest conditions, but this was different. This was about love, connection, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them over days, weeks, and nights spent together. "I've always been human," Daniel said, a small smile forming. "I've faced countless dangers in the stars, but never before have I felt this. You've shown me what it means to care, to be needed, and to belong. I choose to stay, not because of duty, but because of you. Because I can't imagine life without you both." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Selene stepped closer, pressing her forehead against his chest. Leora's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. The connection between them was unspoken but complete. They had trusted him with their lives, and now he was entrusted with their hearts. That night they shared the quiet of the palace chamber. There were no alarms, no threats, no tension, just warmth, closeness, and the comfort of being together. Leora rested her head lightly against his shoulder, and Selene held his hand in hers. It was intimate, yes, but not in a hurried or superficial way. It was the intimacy of trust, of hearts beating together after storms survived, of knowing that they belonged to each other in a way that no danger could ever break. Daniel realized then that this was the meaning of being human, not just strength, strategy, or survival, but the ability to connect deeply, to protect and love fully, and to risk everything for the people who mattered most. He had come to Valara as a soldier, a human among aliens, but he was leaving as something more. A protector, a companion, and a part of a family he had never expected to find. Outside, the stars of Valara glittered in the sky, but Daniel's gaze was fixed on the two women beside him. The galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and dangerous, yet he had found his universe here. In their laughter, their trust, and their shared courage, he had found a home. Leora and Selene smiled at him, their eyes reflecting relief, admiration, and something deeper, love. And in that moment, Daniel understood that no battle, no enemy, no galaxy could ever diminish what they had built together. They were three hearts, strong alone, unstoppable together. As the palace lights glimmered softly around them, Daniel whispered, "I'm yours, always." And in return, the twins embraced him, their trust and love wrapping around him like the warmest armor. The human had become more than a soldier, more than a protector. He had become family, companion, and heart. And for the first time in his life, Daniel Hayes understood the power of being human, not in war or in conquest, but in love, courage, and the unbreakable bond of trust. Together, they faced the stars, not as princesses and a human guard, but as three souls united, ready to meet whatever the galaxy had in store.